In our social newscast with me, Sam Marshall, brought to you by Social TV, we have a chat to the CEO of the Otto Foundation, Zephne Ladbrook, about the role that teachers play in early childhood development and what makes a good teacher, what makes a bad teacher, and how the words and tone of voice that teachers use can form a stored narrative in our heads. Zephne, thank you very much for your time. Let's talk about the value of the teachers within the social structure of communities and how important that person is. Now, I know the Otto Foundation does training with teachers.
I think the value is immense. I think that a teacher often, and this is in any community, and we were talking about it in our team, I think that a teacher can often fulfill a secondary caregiver role. And we were talking about how teachers have inspired us and helped us to fulfill or see our talents where we would not have done that necessarily. And we're talking 20, 30 years ago. And teachers have gone over and above for us. So I think teachers, a good teacher, can really play that role for us in the community. And equally then that means a bad teacher can have that negative impact. And really my message would be to teachers to be careful, to be aware of that, to make sure that they're not that teacher. Because not everyone is able to go home or to a safe place and say, hang on, this teacher is giving me this message that I'm not good enough or not lovable or don't have the potential. What must I make of it? And someone isn't necessarily cheerleading for them at home to say, well, the teacher's not right. And I want teachers to be very aware that everybody needs to be cheerleaders and needs to find what is good. And our team was speaking about it yesterday because in my instance, somehow I found that public speaking was my thing. And I was lucky. I was in a girls' school and I felt safe enough to be able to do it. And I honestly, had I been in a girls' boys co-ed school, I wouldn't have been felt comfortable enough to stand up in front of a class and talk. And that was to a teacher that I felt, hang on, this is my thing. And another friend of mine, another colleague of mine, and also spoke. And she said, well, she had a teacher who, even into her first varsity, would keep in contact with her and encourage her to follow her talents and to see what she was good at. And it really encouraged her to do what she was good at. And it's so important.
When you talk about good and bad teachers, it talks about your own experience. What was your first experience of a bad teacher?
Well, I definitely think it was my grade 3 teacher stands out. So then back then, giving away my age, was standard 1. Mrs. Campbell, the tall, regal woman. And I mentioned I am Afrikaans and I was in a stiff English school. And I definitely felt that because I was Afrikaans, I was treated differently. I was the other. I don't know if you know what that feeling is like, but in those days it was different. It felt that was why I was othered. And she would make comments. She didn't like me. It was so obvious she didn't like me. She would shout at me for silly things. But the one thing that stood out was in a spelling test, I got 9 out of 10, and little Jane got 6 out of 10. And she said to Jane, even Zephne got 9 out of 10. And the message was so clear that even if Zephne is able to do better than you, why can't you do better? And the message was to me that you're not very smart. And I thought it was because they thought I was because I was Afrikaans. I don't know. That was definitely the message I got. And that started adding subconsciously. That played on me a lot. It made me very unhappy. And I believed it for a long time. I definitely believed I wasn't very smart.
I think a lot of us have got these horror stories with teachers that somehow blur the lines between, and to your point that sometimes the teacher is almost an additional parent or an additional parental structure, especially depending on where you come from. But in the holistic context, most teachers have that kind of, or They have that kind of space, both physically and emotionally, in the lives of students. You were then lucky that you were able to, and I assume that you then excelled, you were moved to a different school. How now that you're as an adult and you're running a foundation that's still working with schools, have you been able to kind of work out what makes a good teacher and what makes a bad teacher?
Yes. I think a good teacher goes above and beyond and sees the individual and takes time to see why some kids struggle in the class and why some kids don't. I think you used the example of a child who needed to be moved to the front of the class because it was a vision problem, an eyesight problem. That's a good teacher. My son's teacher, for example, was very quick to say, "Look, he doesn't sit still." And she was quick to say, "It's hyperactive, hyperactive, hyperactive." And he's boisterous and he's energetic. And credit to her, she has 20 boys to work with. It's insane. But in a government school, we work with 40 boys or 40 kids. So 20 boys is quite a luxury. And he just has a different learning style. A good teacher will pick up on a different learning style. And that's not easy. I understand that. But a good teacher would enjoy, I think, getting that from the child and seeing a good child flourish. And seeing how to get the best from a boy. And also then feel a sense of achievement or a sense of accomplishment when you get the best from the child. Patience and empathy and really feeling with the child. I've seen a teacher who tears up when the child is sad. And obviously they must break on a daily basis, and I don't know how they get the correct boundaries in place. They are social workers and psychologists all rolled into one. And I maintain that it's the most noblest, along with nursing, of professions. And we don't do enough for our teachers in this country. So if I was president for a day, I would do more for our teachers than have one teacher appreciation day a year.
It's quite interesting to me that you turned out to be very successful. You're the CEO of a foundation that does groundbreaking work and changes the lives of people. But for a teacher that doesn't get it, words and tone matter. And even now, with your position and what you do, what happened to you at that young age is still stuck with you. How should teachers really reflect on the role that they play in children's lives?
Oh, that's a good question. It's easy for me to say. I remember my grade 3 teacher and grade 4 teacher like it was yesterday, more than I remember my grade 10 and 11 and 12 teacher. And I'll be honest, Sam, I saw my grade 4 teacher the other day, a year ago at a reunion, and I was so tempted to say something to her. And if she wasn't old and on a crutch and frail, I would have said to her, "Do you have any idea the negative impact you had on my life?"
Yeah, sorry,
and
I don't mean to laugh.
It's funny.
I just see this visual like a movie. You know what I mean?
No, it is very funny. I would have tripped her. Honestly, I wanted to say something, but in truth, it wasn't negative. She emboldened me. Her message to me was I wasn't very smart, and because I could go home every day and my family could say to me, "Zephne, this is not true," or prove her wrong, I was able to prove her wrong. Or well, I'd like to think I still try and prove her wrong. I didn't trip her up with her crutches. But I think the message, to answer your question, is to a lot of teachers is there are kids who don't go home or can't go home to families who say, well, actually, the teacher's wrong. Because families are believing what the teachers are saying, because teachers are the authority. We believe the voice of authority. The parents don't know better, the caregivers don't know better, or the parents are preoccupied, or they're not present. So I would say if the faces blend into one, just be careful and be a little bit more patient and just be aware of your tone and be soft and be gentle. And if you can't see the potential in the person, don't be hurtful, don't be harmed. Try and find another way or another outlet for the child to express themselves. Maths isn't it. I'm, of course, every child has potential. There's something a child can do. Give them a ball, give them a paintbrush, give them a pencil to draw. But yeah, be very mindful. And if it's a class of 40, make a plan. Speak, communicate, ask for help. And you made the point of a good governing body. Not every school has a good governing body. But this is where civil society plays a role. I think you need to be loud and vocal and communicative. Draw attention to your situation. If you have 40 kids in a class and you need help, because there are people willing to help. But as a teacher, your tone matters. And a teacher, the child's face might blur, and you might not remember their name, but they're going to remember your message that you've given them, and they're going to remember your name. Like I said, 20 years later, I remembered my teacher and the message she gave me, and how I'm trying to fight every day with the message that she instilled in me.